We will be in the Old Testament book of Joshua, probably starting in chapter 3 if you want to follow along, and I hope that you will in just a little bit. Appreciate you being here today. Let me ask you a question to think about. What enables you to go on? When life blows you off course, or the challenges seem too big, or fear becomes paralyzing to you, what enables you to move forward? This has been a difficult couple of weeks. We have members who are dealing with difficult diagnosis and waiting for tests and procedures. And we have families who've lost. One of our former members, the Casco family, has a loss. The Allen family has a loss. And the Riggs family has a loss. That's why these songs become so emotional. I appreciate the songs that Lance are leading this morning. That's why it's difficult to sing those words sometimes. Words that evoke all kinds of emotion. Sometimes sadness, but oftentimes gratitude and joy for what is before us. These families, as well as the congregation, now have a new dynamic. There will be changes to our schedules, to our sleep patterns, and to our hearts. These are the kinds of things that can either blow you off course and make you hide, or focus your heart to reach deep and to go on. So what is it that helps you to go on? The end of our study of Luke's series that we ended in my last lesson, we noticed that the disciples were at a crossroads. And rather than going on, at least for a time there, they hid. They hid themselves together behind locked doors for fear of the Jews. But after the resurrection, Jesus met with them for some 40 days, and He shared all the precepts about Himself and His kingdom. And after that time, their focus became arrow sharp. And they went out of that locked room. And they went down into the city of Jerusalem. And they went down into the temple. And then they went to all of Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth, sharing this news about Jesus. They were fueled by those precepts about His presence and His promises and His power. And from that chapter, the last chapter that I studied with you in Luke 24, there were three stories that you might remember. There was the first story of the women who went to the tomb. And then there was the story of the men, the disciples who were on the road to Emmaus. And then it ended with the setting back in Jerusalem where the disciples and Jesus entered into their presence again. And in all three of these narratives, we notice the promises of God. We notice the presence of God, and we notice the power of God, even to raise the dead and then to save us by this gospel. And mingled in each of these were God's precepts. He told the disciples of what was happening and why they were happening. According to the Old Testament, all the scriptures that had been written, these are why these things are happening. And He told them what they were to do next after this resurrection. In fact, He told them in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, "You shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all of Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." And they went out after the resurrection doing that very thing. They were driven to tell everybody, even when people tried to silence them, whether it was persecutions or threats or hardships, they couldn't help but tell this message about Jesus. In this, both life and death and life again changed their priorities and their plans and their habits and their hearts. This was a spiritual transition that altered their physical life and their mental and their emotional being as well. But before they transitioned from the cowering disciples locked behind that room, locked behind those doors in that room for fear of the Jews, to the bold disciples heralding the truth of Jesus, they had to wait. In fact, Jesus told them when they were assembled together, He commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait for the promise of the Father. Sometimes waiting is harder than moving on. And I guess it depends on the circumstances, right? A couple has just learned that they're falling in love with each other, and they've waited for this relationship for a long time, and they're ready to take that relationship to the next level. The waiting is over. That was the hard part, but now the moving forward is the easy part. Whether it's moving forward with a marriage proposal, a big investment, a new career, a building project, or moving forward with a diagnosis or a treatment for an illness. Sometimes it's the waiting that is hard. And we wonder, why is it taking so long? Why is it taking so long for this relationship to go to the next level? Why is it taking so long to find that right person? Why is it taking so long for everything to fall in place? Why is it taking so long to get those test results? And we eagerly wait when we see a little bit of light. All of a sudden there's hope, and we're hoping that it'll come, and we're ready to move forward as quickly as possible, like a child at Christmas time. They know what lies under that tree, and they can't wait until it gets there. But sometimes the waiting is the hard part. Yet the disciples, they had to spend at least 5 weeks, a little more than that, with the risen Christ. Soon they were going to take that message to the world, but they had to wait just a little bit longer. The timing wasn't quite right. Not everybody had assembled at Jerusalem. There were some things they had to wait for, but then when it happened, they exploded with this message about Christ and His resurrection and all that that meant for us. And one of the things that had to make that wait more bearable and makes our wait more bearable is that they were relying on His precepts, the one about His presence and His promises and His power. And the things that help us wait are often the things that help us to move forward into areas that we dread. Moving forward into unknown areas or areas of dread can be a fearful thing. Think about waking up in these cold Michigan mornings before the sun is even up, and you have to get up and go out to a work, to a job maybe that you don't even want to do, and you just want to wait a little bit longer. When that alarm clock goes off, you could do a little bit longer without that happening. It's dreaded, something that you'd rather just put off. It's worse when we have to say goodbye to someone we love. That can be a dreaded transition that we have to move forward in. One that we would rather just wait. How about moving into a new community, one where you've never been before? Maybe a little apprehensive about that. What if you knew beforehand that this new community you were moving into would not welcome you, and you would end up going to war with them, a real, literal war? That you and a ragtag army of sojourners were directed to cross a river that was deep and wide, fight enemies who were better armed than you were, our enemies who were living in fortified cities, and they know the layout of the land better than you. And to make it even worse, your trusted leader who'd brought you through the wilderness for 40 years, who had mediated for you and made judgments for you and brought you out of Egyptian bondage, that leader had just died. Now, the waiting is over. And you have to go on into this new land, but without him. And now is the time. It's time to move. Maybe a little fearful? Having some second thoughts? Want to wait a while maybe? Maybe test out this new leader, see a little bit more about our drills and go over the Army drills a little bit more and collect some maps of the terrain. When the Israelites were faced with this, they said to their new leader, "All that you command us, we will do. Wherever you send us, we will go." It sounds a lot like the apostles and the early disciples. Maybe it's because they were relying on the same things, the precepts and the promises and the presence and the power of God. This story takes place in Joshua chapter 3. If you have your Bibles, I want to share with you. It's actually verses chapter 1 through 4 where we read about this crossing over the Jordan into this new land. And in Joshua chapter 3 it begins this way. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from the acacia grove, and they came to Jordan, he and all of the children of Israel. And they lodged there before they crossed over. It was time to go in. Between them and the land that God had promised them was this Jordan River. a long river, about 150 miles. It flowed from the Sea of Galilee all the way down to the Salt Sea or the Dead Sea. And on the other side of that river was their inheritance. It wasn't something they knew about recently. In fact, many generations before this, their father Abraham had been in that land. And God told him, look all around, walk as far as you want to go. I will give you this land. And now his descendants are going to go into that land and give and receive what God promised Abraham so long ago. In order to get to this place, of course, they went through several years in Egypt. And then they became slaves. And then Moses was raised up and he led them out of that land of Egypt. Led them out all the way through the wilderness. It could have been just a short time, but they ended up being there some 40 years because some of them rebelled. And the only leader they knew up until this time was Moses. But now Joshua is their leader, and the time has come for them to receive their inheritance. Everything that God had promised them was on the other side of that river. They'd been through a wilderness. They'd been through hard times. They'd been through a lot of things, but the cities were there. The land that was fertile was there. The promises that God made them was there, but now it was time for them to cross over. But there was some things going on. They had lost their leader. And so as you go on through here, God gives instructions to their new leader, Joshua, about how this is going to take place. They're to carry the Ark of the Covenant, the way that it was supposed to be carried, with the Levites carrying them. And then you find out that they were going to come to this river, and there's supposed to be this distance between everybody else and the Ark of the Covenant. And it was on this day where this new leader would finally be exalted. In verse 7, the Lord said to Joshua, "This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you." This is God's presence. The promise is on the other side. And all of these elements are here in this passage. And they're supposed to go to the edge of the Jordan and stand at the Jordan in verse 8. And then we go all the way down to verse 13 and we read this. Now I'm in Joshua chapter 3 and verse 13. "And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, and the waters that come down from the stream, they shall stand in a heap." This is reminiscent of how they left Egypt. Remember, Moses was taking them away from the Egyptians, and then the Egyptian army began to follow them, and God split the Red Sea, and they walked across on dry land. And when they were across and the Egyptians followed them, the water came over and buried and drowned all of the Egyptian army. Without raising a sword, they were delivered and conquered this great army. They know how God works. They know His power. They know His might. They know that He can conquer armies, and now they got to cross over and conquer another land that the Lord has already promised to give them. They're going to have to fight for it, but He's promised the success already. And so, as the priests come down carrying the ark, they put their feet at the water, and the water at this time had overflowed. It was the widest the river would be because it was harvest time, probably about this time of the year. And as soon as they did this, the water began to stand still. It got cut off somewhere way upstream. I don't know how deep it would have been for them to walk through, if it would have been over their head or not, but I know that 150 miles can contain a lot of water. And so that water begins to pile up somewhere upstream, and the rest of the water runs down, and they walk across, just like God promised. And then as you continue to read into chapter 4, there was the time where Joshua commanded 12 men from each tribe to go back into the river, that area, and pick up some stones, big stones that they would carry on their shoulders, and bring back and pile them up on that side, the new side of the river. And it was a witness. It was a testimony, so that in the years to come, when their children came by and they saw this big pile of rock, the stone, they would say, "What is this here for?" And they would tell them the story of how God parted the water so that they could walk across and receive these promises that God had given them. It's a wonderful story. It's a beautiful story. But how did they manage to get this courage to do this? I mean, yes, there's these promises on the other side. But there's also war on the other side that they have to deal with. And their leader's gone. I want you to look back in chapter 1. Go with me to Joshua chapter 1. And we find their courage, where they received their courage. And they also, it's not without recognizing the difficulties. In Joshua chapter 1 and verse 1, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Words that you don't want to hear. He had been a faithful servant to God, Moses had, and Joshua had been a faithful servant to Moses, an assistant. They had so many things that they had been through together. For over 40 years, or at least 40 years, they had been together as leader and assistant. And all of those people who were there had seen no other leader but Moses. The first 40 years of Moses' life, he was raised in the palace of Pharaoh. And then he became a fugitive, and some of them may have known Moses at that time. But then during his fugitive years, he spent 40 years in Midian being a shepherd. And then after those 40 years, at 80 years old, Moses goes back to Egypt, and he requires that Pharaoh let the people go. And when Pharaoh wouldn't do that, all of those plagues came. And then finally, Moses leads the people out into the wilderness. But they're a ragtag team of people. They don't have laws. God gives them laws through Moses so they will know how to live and how to treat one another and how to honor their God. They went through all of those laws and judgments that Moses had to get. They were hungry together. They were thirsty together. They saw God's power together. They fought armies together. They did all of these things, and now he's gone. He's not there anymore. And some of these people only knew Moses as their leader for their whole life because the previous generation, many of them died in the wilderness. How difficult is it to move on when someone you know, you love, and who's trusted has died? It's extremely difficult sometimes to move on. And now, not only are they told to move on, Joseph is told that he is the one who will be their leader. And so, in verse 2 again, Moses, your servant, is dead. Now therefore rise and go over the Jordan, that you and all this people to the land which I am giving them, the children of Israel. Go ahead, Joshua. Go into this land. And something similar to what he told Abraham, he now says to Joshua, every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you as I said to Moses. He said this to Abraham a long time ago, and he said it to Moses. This is the land that you go into. And so he talks about all of this land that they're going to have. And we go into verse 5. In verse 5, we read, no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you, and I will not leave you, nor forsake you. I mean, this is an amazing thing. And in the first part of this, in verses 1 through 5, we read about the power of God. That His power is so long that He can wait this long to fulfill His promise. He's more patient than we are, but now He's going to fulfill this promise with great power. The river is going to open, and you're going to go in, and you're going to subdue Jericho first, and then all of those other places. But they're not going to do it without His presence. He says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. This sounds very much like Jesus in the New Testament. In John chapter 14, when Jesus had been talking about His departure, the disciples there began to be troubled, and He says, let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me, for in my Father's home, in my Father's mansion are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go to prepare a place for you, there I will return, so that where I am, there you may be also. The presence of God is amazing. There are people who's already crossed the Jordan who I long to see and to be with, but none more than the Lord. And if we can understand the power of His presence, we have the power to move forward. And so, no man will be able to stand before you. And as I was with Moses, I will be with you, and I will not leave you nor forsake you. So he tells Joshua, you have these promises of my power and this success, so be courageous. Verse 6, be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to the father and to give them. to your fathers and to give them. Be strong and courageous, that you may observe to do according to the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it from the right or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. This is His precepts. He gave them 40 years worth of laws so that they would know how to live when they get into this land. And so He says, the book of the law that shall not depart from your mouth in verse 8. In other words, speak of these laws, speak of these truths, speak of the precepts of God, but you shall meditate on it day and night. Have you noticed that the things that we think about are the things that we often talk about? If you talk about somebody who's going through some tragedy, or you talk to somebody who's going through some tragedy, often it's that tragedy that they will talk about. If you talk to somebody who's just gotten good news, it's that good news that they will talk about. And so let these words be on your lips so that they may be on your mind. Meditate on them, that you may observe to do according to all that is written. For then, verse 8, then you will make your way prosperous, and then you'll have good success. I'm reminded of the first psalm about the one who does righteous. He's like the tree that's planted by the waters. In verse 9, have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And based on these precepts about His promises and His presence and His power, Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, pass through the camp and command the people, saying, prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you will cross over the Jordan to go and to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess. And so, in verse 16, they answered Joshua, saying, all that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Much like the apostles did in Acts chapter 1. And then when we come to chapter 3, of course, we already read Joshua rose early in the morning. He came to the Jordan, and he prepared to cross over. You know, there's various poetic analogies that's been applied to this idea of crossing over the Jordan. Some analogies is from bondage to freedom. They had left Egypt where they were in bondage, and finally they're crossing the Jordan where they will receive their own place. And they will have the freedom to worship their God and to live as He has instructed them. So this idea is often used in African American spirituals, but that's not all. It's also the ideas connected to it of going from life to death and then death to everlasting life. And it's used in many of the hymns that we worship with. Here's a couple of the examples that you might know about. This morning, on Jordan's stormy banks. The lyrics say, on Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. Over there is my possessions. On this side, it's hardship, it's a wilderness, but over there, it's the place where we will settle and we will raise our children and we will love the Lord and we will worship the Lord in peace and He will bless us. And so I stand on this side, casting a wishful eye to that side where all my possessions lie. And then there's the idea of the wayfaring stranger that we sing this morning. And in those lyrics we read, I am just going over Jordan. I'm just going over home. Where we realize that here we are just pilgrims wandering, sojourners wandering through a wilderness, but over there, that's my home. That's where I want to be forever. We still sing of this account of Joshua chapter 3 and rightly notice all the foreshadowing and its relevance in today's age, because there will come a time when we too will cross over the Jordan. Jesus taught us that some will rise to life and others to judgment. And that's the difference as to whether this crossing over is joy or dread, if it's difficult or delight, if there's fervor or fear. A few days before Sister Allen passed away, Tanya and I went to visit her. She was still very lucid and she was comfortable and able to speak and to visit for a while. But it was refreshing in the sense that not only at that time was she comfortable and able to speak, but that she had this hope and this zeal for crossing over. She anticipated it with open arms. She said, I'm ready. I know that one of our other sisters, Heather, was a nurse for her through hospice. And me and Tanya went there, I think, on a Friday, and Heather had already been there. And Heather had said, I'll see you Monday. And so she said, Heather said, I'll see you Monday. So she said, I guess I'm going to be around for another weekend. She said, I don't know what the Lord's waiting on. Sometimes the waiting is hard. Sometimes it's very hard. Sometimes the crossing is difficult. In the same event, there can be waiting and eager anticipation. Two things that are both made easier with God's precepts about His promises, His presence, and His power. If it's been a difficult week for you, may I remind you that even though our circumstances may be difficult, God's character is still the same. If we can assist you, I invite you to come while we stand and sing.